Egypt had once been a land of refuge, but now it was a land of sorrow. The Israelites, descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, had grown numerous, and Pharaoh grew afraid. To control them, he enslaved them with harsh labor. Day after day, Hebrew men worked under the blazing sun, making bricks and hauling stones. Whips cracked, overseers shouted, and sweat poured from their brows. Yet the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied. Pharaoh's fear turned to cruelty, and he gave a dreadful command. Every Hebrew baby boy must be thrown into the Nile. The cries of mothers filled the land, but heaven was listening. In Pharaoh's palace, the king sat upon his golden throne, his voice echoing across the hall as he gave his cruel decree. Soldiers obeyed, spreading terror among the Hebrews. Fathers stood powerless. Mothers clutched their infants in despair. It seemed as though Pharaoh's word had sealed the fate of Israel. Yet even as his command brought fear, God was writing a greater story, one that Pharaoh himself could never undo. Among the Hebrews was a man named Amram and his wife Jochebed, already parents to Miriam and Aaron. They welcomed another child into their home. When Jochebed gave birth to a baby boy, her heart filled with joy and fear. The child was beautiful, a sign of God's hand upon him. She whispered through tears, "This child is from the Lord. He must have a purpose." For 3 months, they hid him in secret, protecting him from Pharaoh's soldiers and praying for God's mercy. But as the child grew, so did the danger. His cries became louder, and soon it was impossible to conceal him. Jochebed and Amram trembled each time footsteps passed by their door. Miriam learned to hush her little brother's cries, and Aaron played quietly. Yet the threat outside grew stronger each day. In the stillness of night, Jochebed prayed, "O God of our fathers, give me wisdom. Show me how to save my son." Her heart broke, but her faith in God's plan remained unshaken. At last, Jochebed acted in faith. She gathered reeds and wove a basket, sealing it with tar so it would not sink. She lined it with cloth, then placed her baby gently inside. With tears streaming down her face, she whispered, "Lord, I place him in your hands." With Miriam at her side, she carried the basket to the Nile. Kneeling among the reeds, she released it into the water. Though her heart ached, her faith clung to the God who saves. Miriam could not leave her baby brother unguarded. She hid among the tall reeds, watching the basket float on the water. Her young heart pounded with fear, yet she stayed, ready to see what God would do. Every ripple in the Nile, every sound in the distance made her tremble. Still, she watched, believing that somehow her brother was in God's hands. As the sun climbed higher, the river glistened with light. Pharaoh's daughter, the princess of Egypt, came to the Nile with her maidens. Dressed in royal garments, she walked gracefully by the water's edge. Suddenly, her eyes caught sight of the basket nestled among the reeds. Pointing, she sent one of her attendants to fetch it. None of them knew that inside that little basket was a child who would one day stand before Pharaoh himself. The princess opened the basket, and at once the baby cried. She looked upon him, and her heart softened. "This is one of the Hebrew children," she said, yet instead of anger, compassion filled her soul. She lifted him into her arms, and the child calmed at her touch. At that moment, Miriam stepped forward with courage. "Shall I find a Hebrew woman to nurse the child for you?" she asked. The princess smiled and replied, "Yes, go." God had perfectly placed Miriam there for such a moment as this. Miriam ran to bring her mother, and Jochebed's heart soared when she heard the news. Standing before the princess, she bowed low. With kindness, the princess said, "Take this child, nurse him for me, and I will pay you." Jochebed could hardly believe her ears. Not only was her son alive, but she was entrusted to raise him openly. She gathered him into her arms with tears of joy. What had seemed like the end had become a beginning. God had turned sorrow into gladness. Under his mother's care, the child grew strong and healthy. Jochebed taught him about the God of Israel, about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and about the promises of deliverance. These truths sank deep into his heart. When he was old enough, she brought him back to Pharaoh's daughter, who raised him in the royal palace. There, he learned the wisdom of Egypt, trained in leadership and strength. Moses grew up in two worlds, as a prince in Pharaoh's courts, but also as a child of Israel, carrying the faith of his people in his heart. The princess loved him dearly and gave him a name, Moses, saying, "Because I drew him out of the water." The boy who should have been drowned in the Nile was now a prince of Egypt. His very name was a testimony of God's deliverance. Pharaoh had tried to destroy Israel's sons, but God had placed one under Pharaoh's own roof. What Pharaoh meant for evil, God turned for good. The river that was meant to bring death became the very place of salvation. Through a mother's courage, a sister's watchfulness, and a princess's compassion, God preserved the life of a baby who would one day lead his people to freedom. This is the power of God's plan. It cannot be stopped. It cannot be overturned. And the same God who watched over Moses still watches over us today. No matter the darkness around us, his deliverance always comes, sometimes to the smallest, most fragile beginnings.